Wanted to do a quick screencast just to show the method I've been using, or at least experimenting with, to create my initial vector art in Photoshop CS6 as opposed to Illustrator, which is my the main way I used to, obviously used to do it, but started thinking, Photoshop has a couple of features I really like. One of them being the dynamic zoom tool, which if you hold down the Z key and just drag left and right, or I guess up and down, left and right, it'll zoom in and out based on where you put the cursor, which I find pretty handy. And the other one is the rotate view tool, which is the R key. So you hold that down and you can just arbitrarily move the canvas just so you can work at a better angle for your wrist. And one of the big problems that I have with Illustrator is sometimes the angle for creating vector paths is a little funky, and you have it's mostly carpal tunnel or whatever kind of concerns, because moving my wrist up sometimes to create to drag out anchor point handles is sometimes just a little awkward, and I can feel the tension back over by my elbow. So I've just always been looking for a way to reduce stuff like that. So I'm just going to give you guys an example here of how I do this. So hit P for the pen tool, and I'll describe some of the limitations of this. But basically, works pretty good. One of the things you need to do, and I think this might happen in CS5, but you need to make sure that you're on a when you're on the pen tool up in your toolbar here, you want to choose a path layer as opposed to the shape layer. The shape layer is the old way of doing vectors in Photoshop, at least before CS6, and I think CS5 changed this, but I can't recall. But basically, if you ever used vectors in Photoshop, you'll know that it puts like a flat fill of a color, and then it'll basically use the vector path to mask that out for the shape, and it's not as handy. You can't really manipulate it, change the fill and the stroke, and they've really updated the pen tool and the vector tools in CS6 to take advantage of vectors in a way that's more closer to the way Illustrator does it. So. It's good to see that, and I kind of forgot about it until recently, and decided to give it a try. So, and I was primarily looking to use the rotate view tool, but I found that I like the dynamic zoom feature even more than the rotate view tool. But I'm going to give you an example how I'm working here. So, for example, on this, what I do is I trace the line art of my sketches. I don't use stroked paths. I just trace these as objects. So what you end up having to do is, say click here, then you have to drag it, what I consider kind of an awkward angle back here to get this curve here, and then maybe down here. And you do things that you have to kind of tweak your arm to fit how you're going to drag out the curve. But with the rotate view tool, you can just pick the curve that you need, and you're always dragging down, which to me is much more ergonomic, at least more comfortable. And the pen tool works pretty close to how it does in Illustrator. You get there's a couple of things that are slightly different. When you close a path off, it deselects it, so that's and that may be something in the preferences that I can change. But when you select it, you hit the Command key on a Mac, you will get your anchor point selection tool, and you can do just what you could always do what you can do in Illustrator is grab an individual point. You can hold the Option key down for the Convert Anchor Point tool, do the same thing there. There was one thing that was a little different. Oh yeah, the one thing that is different with this is when let's say you want to make a compound path, or I'm sorry, a compound point, and you drag out here. Now in Illustrator, you could just click back with the pen tool to create a compound point there. You can't do that in Photoshop. You have to hold down the Option key for the Convert Anchor Point tool, and you'll see the pen tool icon changes to that. And then if you click there, then you can do the compound point. So so that's one little difference, but it's not a huge one. And actually, most of the other stuff works pretty much as expected. Now, there's some things that you can't do that, and maybe you can, but they're just not as convenient as they are in Photoshop. or I'm sorry, in Illustrator. But for the most part, it works pretty close, and you can work, if you're pretty good with the pen tool in Illustrator, you'll be able to pick this up pretty quick, and it's not, you know, too much different minus those two things that I showed you. At least I haven't discovered anything else major that's you know, that's just, it's a difference between the two pen tools. But I really enjoy being able to do this and angle my artwork so that I'm always dragging in a comfortable position, as opposed to having to pick a strange angle for my wrist and drag in a funny position. So I'm pretty pleased with this technique, and I've been using it on a few projects recently, and it seems to be working great. I haven't really found any limitations besides just the fact that it's not as, you know, things aren't as full featured in Illustrator, or I mean in Photoshop, as they are in Illustrator, as far as vector, you know, manipulating the paths and stuff. And to be honest, I haven't even dug in very deep with it, and maybe some of those things aren't an issue. But you know, things like creating compound paths and option dragging to duplicate paths and stuff like that, those aren't. If they're available, they're not as intuitive, or I'm just unaware of them right now. So they might be in there, but to be honest, I don't even really need that to be, you know, because what I'm doing with these is I eventually take them into Illustrator. So all you need to do once you're done with creating your vector art is just go up to File, Export, Paths to Illustrator, and it'll save it as an AI file, and it'll just be your vector paths. You just either copy and paste those into your actual Illustrator file, or you can place your sketch as a template into the Illustrator file that you exported from Photoshop, and then just continue to work from there, which is what I've been doing. I just basically do the line art, these black outlines. I'll trace everything, get them down pretty close, and then export them into Illustrator file, open that up, and finish things off in Illustrator. Now the one downside to that technique is I do find that sometimes I'm tweaking the file more once I'm getting all these little tweaks and stuff, and I want to go back and edit things and add shading and highlights, is I'll find that sometimes this rotate, view, and zoom tool would be a lot handier to have in the kind of the cleanup stage, as opposed to this basic, prepping the line art stage. But it still saves a lot of time, and like I said, what I really like about it is this zoom tool. I've got the excuse me, I've got the pixel grid turned on, but what's really handy is to be able to go into some of these some of these details in the artwork, but not have to take your hand off the basic keyboard shortcuts that you're using. So you can just zoom in and out, work on things, and if you see something that you want to really get into, you can zoom in without having to look down at the keyboard. I mean, I'm just assuming that if you're getting this geeky with this stuff, that you're pretty good with your keyboard shortcuts. You'll see that it's a lot, and maybe you don't have a problem with the pen tool, but for me, like I said, I can feel that tension in my wrists, or at least in my elbow, in the tendons. And I've had some problems in the past, and I'm just trying to, anything I can do to avoid those is a positive thing. But I really, really like being able to zoom in and out like this. And these are things that I've already submitted to the feature request thing on Adobe, and to Adobe, and who knows if we'll ever see something like these two tools, but I think they would really come in handy now that I've used them, because before I thought, hey, it's a feature request, but maybe they won't work with the pen tool. But now that I'm using them in Photoshop, I definitely want to see these things added to Illustrator, and I'm hoping that maybe maybe this video will get a little bit of attention, and maybe somebody at Adobe will take heed and see what kind of a benefit this would be to vector artists. Because I really feel like having these two tools, especially the rotate view and the dynamic zoom, having these things added just to Illustrator, just those two would be enough for me. I mean, I guess really that's still all I'm really using here in Photoshop. But I really like the idea too of being able to, because this is one of my things too, is I'd love to have an app that had something like this where it was sketching. You know, Photoshop is technically not a drawing program. I mean, it is now, but it's technically a photo manipulation program. And I'd love to have see a program, you know, something like Manga Studio Pro, which the interface is just so outdated and it's very difficult to work with. In my opinion, it's got a pretty steep learning curve, and it seems like a great program because it mixes vector and raster, and you can you know, sketch and vector and do all this stuff, mix and match. And I'd love to be able to, you know, come in here and be able to throw vector elements down and you know, put the vectors down, go back and edit my sketch and do it all in one file, so I'm not, you know, placing images and having to go back and forth. And it's not like it's a huge deal, but there's a lot of times where I'm placing multiple types of elements and I'm working on sketches and I want to use the text as vector, or, you know, some things are just easier to manipulate as vector objects, and some things are easier to do, you know, with the brush tool, you know, the pencil. I mean, I'm sorry, the Photoshop's brush tool. So there's just a few things that would just, you know, having a hybrid of those two apps would help. But I think this would be a good step in the right direction. Is to, you know, I don't expect Photoshop to have the to get the you know, the full pen tool treatment, but I could see Adobe adding the this, you know, dynamic zoom and the rotate view tools to Illustrator, because like I said, once you start, if you just play with this for a little bit, you'll really start to see how this speeds things up. And it really, you know, and this is only like maybe the third or fourth project that I've, you know, or illustration that I've vectored this way. So I'm still getting used to, you know, when to rotate and what's most accurate. But even at this early stage of playing around with this, it's extremely handy, and I'd love to see this stuff added to Illustrator. So in the meantime, this is how you do it in Photoshop. I think I covered everything that, for some reason I feel like there was another limitation that that gave me that I wanted to mention about, you know, using the pen tool in Photoshop, but I can't think of it now. But like I said, this is just a quick overview to show people what, 'cause I mentioned this on Twitter that I was experimenting with this, and I did a quick screencast before just to show somebody, you know, why I wanted to see this added and how I'm using it. So I just thought I would do a little bit more, explain this a little bit more, show you how I'm doing it now that I've, you know, given it a little bit more of a real world application and use, and decided that it actually does work with the workflow. It's not just a little gimmicky thing that I tried out. It's actually something that I'm going to continue to use. And you know, like I said, this is pretty much just going to be for what you see on the screen. I'll go back, add colors, and do everything else with Illustrator because it just has, you know, it has the full tool set. But for getting this stuff down and being able to really manipulate your lines without having to contort your arms and everything, it's super fast. And like I said earlier, I don't know if this is even possible in earlier versions of Photoshop due to the way that they handled vector paths in Photoshop. I don't think they had the ability to have these shapes, and you might still be able to do what I'm doing there. It's just I don't have the older versions installed anymore. But I think now that they have path layers in addition to the shape layers, I think that may be a key, but you know, possibly not. So that's it for now. I just wanted to, like I said, give a quick overview of this, show how I'm working it, and let you guys see it in real time while I'm working on an actual project, and just give you a feel for how handy this is.